2019 convention. We appreciate you being here. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our speaker, Johnny Boucher. He is a spouse, a parent, a friend, and a distinguished educator for the Dallas Independent School District. He is also the first reported gender nonconforming educator to run for a position at a Texas school board. Johnny is a social activist. When he was asked why he made the decision to run for the school board, he had this to say: as teachers, we see from the ground level every day what is working at our campuses and what is not. After the appointment of DeVos as Secretary of Education, I have been dismayed at how common it is for people without any classroom experience to make critical education policy decisions. While guiding his exemplary public Montessori classroom by day and coaching other Montessori teachers, by evening and weekends, Johnny organizes transgender community both nationally and internationally, administrating medical and personal support groups. The total membership exceeds 50,000 participants. Johnny is a member of the Mayor's LGBT Task Force for the City of Dallas, as well as a trustee for Hope Day School, the only known early childhood school administered entirely by LGBT leadership. It is associated with Dallas Cathedral of Hope, the world's largest predominantly LGBT church. Johnny holds a Master's of Education degree specializing in Montessori and early literacy, awarded by Southern Methodist University. Johnny is credentialed in Montessori through the Association Montessori International, the Netherlands, was recently selected to join the competitive Dallas ISD lead cohort, which identifies 25 of the most promising educators in the city for intense mentoring in urban school administration. Please join me in welcoming Johnny Boucher.
Hi, everybody. I think we're going to test the microphone for just a second. That sounded very fancy. I was just thinking of myself mostly as a preschool teacher, and somewhere in there is the real me. I have a lot of photos to show you because this is a big story for folks that aren't already deeply enmeshed in the trans community. So with a limited amount of time of just about an hour, I'm going to keep it under an hour to leave time for your reflection and questions if you want to discuss it. But I think the pictures will help me use the best of the time. So we can have this conversation on a few different levels, and to differentiate for a moment where you come from. Sometimes we feel in the community as trans people that you can have these high-level discourse, but if you take it to a session of beginners, it's not going to help anybody. So sometimes I feel like I have to start from the very beginning of what is transgender, or what is a trans man, or what are those things. Could I see a show of hands of who has close friends that are transgender? Okay, so y'all are like the advanced group. And if you have gotten into any studies of gender theory, so a couple, and who are involved with maybe grassroots organizations of trans folks, not with letters after our names, but who are just like doing the work with trans sex workers and trans murders and all of those sorts of things, trans health advocacy. Yes, okay, so I'm very glad that we don't have to start at the very basic 101. Facebook put these badges by my picture. They said visual storyteller and conversation starter. And I thought it was kind of funny because that's how I see myself. And it's interesting that a robot identified me that way. But one of the ways that I build huge community is by telling a story and using a picture. And I do that multiple times per day. This is the context where I come from. My family is a mix of Cajun Creole from southern Louisiana in this area and Texan. And this is the neighborhood where my family's home has been for the last 4 generations. And here's Dallas. Dallas is a blend of urban and a passion for the rural. I love this picture of Dallas with the cowboy grazing the cattle just outside of downtown Dallas. There's a juxtaposition everywhere. And this is the house now. I moved back in with my dad, and we take care of the old family homestead now in the center of the city. But I've been living in Grand Prairie, Texas, because living in the city is too expensive. So a lot of this story takes place in Grand Prairie, Texas, an exurb. And we have a history of trans people. A lot of folks come in with the understanding this is something brand new, but this reminds me so much of my wife and myself. There she is out on the family land looking at Rattlesnake Hill. And that's how I looked about 10 years ago when I had an education degree but didn't go into the classroom because there was no non-discrimination policy at the time, and I didn't think it would be safe for me to express myself from an inner perspective outwardly. So I was a housewife. I was a conservative housewife, and I had 2 children in the span of 2 years. And I think I was pregnant in that photo. But at one point, everything changed. I'm going to tell a little bit of the love story between me and my wife, Ashley, because meeting Ashley, a transgender woman, I was assigned female at birth. Some people would say born a woman, but I don't use that term because it sounds like I was born like a little Jackie Kennedy, like this big. But Ashley was, people say, were you born a man? And it just sounds ridiculous to us. But Ashley was assigned male at birth, and she is a transgender woman. I identify as non-binary. I see myself, my gender is very much somewhere a point in the gender galaxy that our culture doesn't have language for. But to keep it simple for everybody, I just say, oh yeah, I'm a man, I'll round up. Ashley is a chef, and I have been a teacher. I just recently started a role of Montessori specialist. And I have a great relationship with my students. That has made it safe for me to be a teacher in the public sector. This is what the Montessori public classrooms look like. And I also work so hard to break down stereotypes of what masculinity has to be. A lot of people who fear transgender folks from the progressive side see it as a reiteration of stereotype or a reinforcement of gender roles that we don't need. But as I was discussing with some of you just last night, to become a man, I had to become the kind of man that I would admire. And in my head, that role didn't exist. So I had to explore what that could be and build it one piece at a time. Some things from my class. This was my daughter, Sydney, who would go on to come out as trans. She drew a picture of me, and I was wearing a chest binder. So this is a 4 or 5-year-old who saw that as an essential piece of me, this garment that held my chest flat before I had chest surgery. And she wrote, "I love you, Dad." There's Grand Prairie, a little bit of how it feels. I don't understand how you can go 15 miles and travel 25 years back in time, but that's the context of Grand Prairie. There's a lot of love for football and pictures of JFK driving through town. Here I am in the yearbook, and this is how I feel a lot of the time in schools. I just keep a lot inside and keep going. This is our homeland. This is Ashley and me in our Texas context. To be a trans Texan is to fight for your space in a place that doesn't like you. And everyone associates your home with everything that isn't you. It puts us in a strange place to love our home because it's not a requited love so much of the time. This is one of those analysis bubbles of all of the things that I said over the past 15 years online. And these were the words I used the most. So this is a picture of it. School and education and work. There were elections and friends and people and community and family. But all of this took place while I was trying to keep my job as a teacher. There were many people in the community that weren't comfortable with that. If you haven't seen a gender transition take place, this is what I looked like on my first ID. And I have a collection of those IDs, and I show them because when you meet a trans person, we could be at any point in that transition, or we could be part of an entirely different outward journey, entirely different outward journey. But this was mine. That was the bad hair years. And here I am today. So people who meet me now don't realize that I have more experiences than just that of a queer man. I have had to exist attributed as a butch lesbian. I have existed attributed as a femme lesbian. I have been attributed as a straight woman. And so I have navigated the workplace from all of those lenses and run those gauntlets. Everything changed when I borrowed $10 from a friend to go see a show at the Gayborhood in Dallas. There was a woman standing under the spotlight, and she was singing about herself at the piano. And I'm not a very good singer since the voice surgery that lowered my voice, but she said, "Here's to sitting and crying alone in the hall over really not filling that dress out at all. Here's to raising my wrist, having never been kissed. Here's to being 11 feet tall." And she sang about not getting to be part of her church anymore, and her parents loathing her, and losing all of her friends, and not having expressed my transition yet, and being so much in an eggshell. I connected with this, and I experienced love at first sight. I've wondered since then whether it was love for the same longings that I had to express, or love for this person, but they've grown together. As a performer locally, she was very connected to the transgender women in town, and was a local luminary performer. And when I got her audience, that was very special for me. And she brought me into community with other trans people. So as I was going to work during the day teaching a kindergarten class, I was becoming more and more a part of this subculture, and my appearance was changing also. My principal was starting to get uncomfortable, and she said, is there a medical problem that you have? Ashley and I got engaged, and I got called to the principal's office, and she said to me, "Have you been sharing too much of your personal life in the classroom? Are you married to a man or to a woman?" And I didn't quite know how to explain that, but I felt very trapped and wondered if I would have to leave the field of education. I found a haven in Montessori schools, and I advised through our Dallas Morning News, I wrote an article about how to stay safe as a teacher and how to be out as a teacher. For me, it was identifying which niche area of K-12 education was most welcoming. I found Montessori schools tended to have people with broader ideas, willing to focus on the individual's path and development, and I took a gamble that I could be out at a Montessori school. Before choosing the Montessori school, I researched the polling data of the precincts around the school that the attendance zone contributed towards, so that the parents who would be there would be least likely to make the barrage of calls to the superintendent's office, which had happened before. Ashley and I we got married, and when we did, there was a huge news crew waiting for us. I had told my boss, I'm going to be taking Friday off for court, and I was getting married at the court, and a few hundred of our friends came. None of our family came. At the last minute, my sister did. But there were all of these, this one's a tabloid, actually, and I got them to edit a lot of the language just by writing a sweet letter to the author, like, "Did you know this is mean?" As a pre-K teacher, I could express those things from my own professional language, like, it hurts that you talked about us that way. And surprisingly, they changed it. But they said we were the first group of legal gay weddings by the transgender loophole. And we were afraid at the time that the loophole might close because her birth certificate said male and my birth certificate said female. And she had completed her transition to female. And I had not outwardly begun my medical transition to male. So looking like two women, we were allowed to get married. There's the news crews and the people who showed up for our quiet little secret courthouse wedding. And I got a text the next day from my principal to ask if I would amend my absence form for the correct reason that I was out. We continued our advocacy, and that's become a big part of our family. We are raising 2 children together, one of whom is trans, and we have re-entered the country and Western community by making spaces that queer people can feel safe hearing country music that we would perform. So day to day, we think like anybody else, but our schedules seem to be overbooked with beyond like the dishes and the laundry and the kids' homework. We might get a text that says, come on, you need to go right now. There's a meeting at the Mesquite City Hall, and they're debating whether they want trans protections, and no one trans is speaking there. No one's speaking in favor. Can you and Ashley come right now? So we'll get those emergency type of things that disrupt what we're trying to do. When I ran for office, this was actually an impromptu family photo where we were just in the backyard at a friend's house, and they said, the light's really good. Everything we've done has been on a shoestring because in Texas, and in many other places, I'll show you a map, in many other places there is not protection for us to have inclusive insurance. Most health insurance is for educators at a number of colleges, even in states where it's required to be provided, if no one challenges it. Transgender care is considered cosmetic or a cosmetic pre-existing condition. So even if you can't have a pre-existing condition, they might say, you have pumped your body full of testosterone for the past 7 years, and as a result, we couldn't cover this other endocrine issue or thyroid issue because we don't know if your cosmetic choices have impacted that in some way. And with that huge open-ended, well, we don't know if this is related to what you've done to yourself. We have found it very difficult to get medical care in general. So while I was teaching and offered health insurance, I wasn't really able to use it. Here's life now, sitting on the porch, eating dinner on warm evenings with my father. We have made peace with him, but a lot of the trans people in your organizations might be suffering from exclusion from family supports, on top of community supports. Without having those parental resources, you are like a new generation every time you form community. Getting that back has taken enormous effort and doesn't happen for all of us. This is the health insurance rules that I was talking about. The gray areas are where we cannot have guaranteed transgender inclusive health insurance. And when I was choosing a place to do my EDD program, I looked to see if I could go online to one of these blue states. We couldn't move. Most of us don't have the financial resources or mobility to just up and move. And some of the folks who have up and moved ended up homeless in those other states when they couldn't find a job quickly enough, or the medical expenses out of pocket got out of hand. So if you could somehow connect with these dark blue states, then you could get health insurance. So I got into Johns Hopkins EDD program, and the health insurance for students said trans inclusive. However, I discovered even in the inclusive states, there are many times caps on the healthcare. And so I spent 6 months of my mental health deteriorating, trying to get the cap removed from my care. Because to include trans people in the health insurance, they say it's too expensive. Why don't we put a cap on it? But that means that maybe you could have the first stage of a surgery, but never complete it and put yourself in a very dangerous position. So I said, if you don't remove this cap, it means that you don't include the surgeries at all. And I leveraged everything in my soul and my being, and we got it removed. It wasn't removed just for me, but it was removed for 14 million other trans students through consolidated student health plans. And I think at the end of my life, if I wonder if I've made a difference, it was to ensure that college students could get transition care. A lot of us become underemployed because the depression from not being able to access that care while in college puts you off track. You cannot focus on your studies, and you cannot afford both college and your out-of-pocket medical care. Even when I do have health insurance that's inclusive, every now and then I still get these. The diagnosis is inconsistent with the patient's gender. For a while, I had a scrotum with testicles, and I also had a uterus. And if I wanted to choose to get care for one of those, I never knew which one the computer system said that I was male or female, and they're set up automatically to deny the claim if it's for another gender, their computers try to look for fraud. And I am always running that gauntlet and wasting my time. There's a huge time suck for trans people, because what would be a normal phone call to the bank is 12 layers of security because your voice doesn't match who they expect to call, and they think that you're trying to defraud them. This is the sensational part. People always want to see the before and after together. And a lot of trans people are surrounded by messages that if you transition, you will become horrifying or ugly or no one will like you anymore. And I like to think that I've found my own cute in all of my different manifestations. It has been an extreme personal journey to find professional clothing that would fit my body. Because to work as a male professional, you are expected to have certain types of clothes. Well, what if those don't exist in stores that will fit that bottom and that length of legs and that size of shoulders in proportion to the hips? So for a while, I was wearing really oversized, dumpy things that were just big enough to go around my body. I was hemming as actively as I could, trying to learn how to sew things, and I really looked a mess for a while. And I think if I were perceived to be less professional on the basis of how I was dressed, it has been not the experience of getting $75 or $200 and going to a department store. It has been the experience of saving up $1,500 for a custom suit from scratch, because those pieces are not available for purchase, or scouring through vintage clothing for something that is of a high enough quality garment that it's worth $200 or $300 of alterations. So when you see a trans person presenting professionally, that the amount of effort that we have put to get to that point is extraordinary. I would usually have to pay $40 to have the cuffs moved to the appropriate arm length, or I could roll them up. I learned lots of tricks, and I would write them for others so that they too could be able to clothe themselves for work. And here is the juicy stuff. This is one of my little figurines at my dad's house, and I feel like he's about to tell you like the news, so I put him in here. I got my hormones, but only through extreme efforts convincing therapists who had no background in gender that I really was transgender. And walking in not looking trans, that means that you get a first glance for them to decide if you're serious or not. So I would have my wife check me before I went in, like, how's this? Should I sit like this or like this? How does this wallet look? Because I didn't have the ability to buy true masculine clothing. I could get what I could get at a thrift store. Who in the beginning of their early 20s can have one professional wardrobe and then need to craft one from scratch, bulk material on that kind of notice? Like, you need this suddenly now. There's a little joke for you. I really liked that one. I had to go through 2 puberties. So there was a physical stress of my body changing its endocrine systems in my mind. It really is true that you think differently with different hormonal spectra. And adjusting to that while a new teacher was challenging for me. when I finally was able to have these surgeries, I had to take medical leave from the EDD program that was such a dream come true. And I had to focus on utilizing the health insurance that I would never have access toward again, living in Texas and committed to living in Texas. So to make my penis, they grafted the skin from my forearm, about from here to here. And the next picture is graphic, so you might want to look away. It's my arm. There I was in the ICU, and I was by myself, 1,800 miles away from home, motionless for about 6 weeks until I could sit up. But we carried on, and I built an online community while I was there. I had a wound vacuum that surrounded my arm in the absence of skin because they borrowed the nerves and the arteries all the way down to the tendon. And I felt like I was part of the Borg, if you have ever seen Star Trek, because I was connected to so many tubes. I thought it was really cool, so I have a science picture beside it for what I was thinking I was like. But it was about 6 very, very intensive surgeries over 2 years. And I got to learn to walk again, because when you are still for so long, you lose the ability. It's amazing that even after 5 days of not moving a muscle, you can't stand up anymore, that we can lose our strength so quickly. So from my hospital bed, I was FaceTiming my classroom with the substitutes to make sure they were doing their work. And the kids were horrified that I could see them also. They thought it was going to be like TV. And I was saying things like, Elizabeth, please look this way from the hospital. But this picture, if I was trying to be under the radar, this picture got on the cover of US News and World Report, like patient's gender-affirming surgery, penis, 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 all over the text of it. So I feel like as a trans person, you have 2 modes professionally. Everyone knows way too much of your business and can Google you and read your entire history, or you have to work incredibly hard to be stealth, where no one knows you're trans, if that's possible, cutting off all of your former professional connections, moving to another state and starting completely over, or another country. So those are your 2 options. I chose the very out route, and it has meant that when I start a new job and they Google me, they get to know my feelings about my penis and like things that you wouldn't normally expose to an employer. This is the graphic photo. This is how my arm healed over the last 2 years, where it was bare tendons and then grafted skin from a large section of my leg. And slowly over time, it came to life as my own body. I wear a watch to cover it. I had to have the fat from my hips taken out and grafted into my arm, where it was kind of shrunken in, so that I could wear men's pants and not have to spend so much money to have them altered each time for my workplace. There are many surgeries you can want because your body doesn't align to you, but there are, for most of us, surgeries that we have to get so that we can participate in this culture. And those are the ones that make us sad. It was sad for me to have a very painful surgery on my hips so that I could work and so that I could buy clothing to work. And it was sad for me to have my larynx, the cartilage around it, cut off so that my vocal cords would vibrate at a lower frequency. Because every time I would speak, people would double take, like, your voice doesn't match what you look like. For a lot of people, testosterone is enough to lower the voice, but for me it didn't. And for many transgender women, the voice changes through coaching, but unless you have surgery, it outs you immediately. When I was running for school board and going door to door, people would sometimes say things like, you seem really great, but you sound like and then they would use various slurs. This is some of the technology inside of my body. This controls an erection. You might be interested to know. There are hydraulic pistons inside of a small button in my scrotum that transfer a reservoir of saline into the cylinders which replace the corpus cavernosa, that would be engorged with blood, but for me, it's from that saline chamber through this magnificent mechanism there. It's so difficult to get coverage for these things. You wouldn't have to do it at Johns Hopkins, but because they put so much effort into making sure that I, as one of the first patients of this center, did well, it was over $800,000 of medical care. So I definitely would not have been able to pay for that out of pocket ever. Some people will sell their house and move in with a relative, and they'll be able to put a $200,000 payment to, if they have a home, towards surgery, or they will fundraise their entire lives. I knew a gentleman who fundraised his $90,000 to buy surgery in Thailand by just his lifetime savings. And when his wife became ill, he had to use it for her cancer care. So he did not get to achieve what he had set out to do. I'm very grateful that Johns Hopkins allowed me to have these surgeries and access this care, but it meant that my plan to get an EDD went far off course. I had not accounted for how your body healing takes away your mental energy also. And that even when you're not hurting, your body is hard at work healing these complex systems and rebuilding layers of flesh that you borrowed from another place. I found myself exhausted, as if as soon as I got home from work, I just wanted to lay down. And it wasn't even like I want to lay down sad. It was, this is all my body can do. And I gradually worked out of a wheelchair, and that's the kind of thing that I was engaging as an educator, trying to keep growing, desperately wanting to participate in this program, but knowing I had to choose between the medical care that the school could give me or developing the credential that I would need for my work. And I made the choice for my health. It's still hard for me to think about where I could be if I hadn't spent 2 years of my life working on my body, and I wished that it hadn't bothered me the way it did. But I now have a letter. Everything that we do, I joke that we're like AKC registered trans people because we have letters, but we have letters that say this person is male. We recommend they change their driver's license gender marker to male. We recommend that this person is allowed to change their birth certificate to male. Because even if you can get all of those surgeries, if your documents don't align, you're at high risk of being discriminated against in the workplace. I have court orders that I carry around with me. I have therapist letters that I have to maintain and get refreshed every so often. I had to provide one whole-scale psychiatric evaluation and a very detailed letter that I feel like has way too much information in it to get surgery. There is no other area of surgery where you have to provide this depth of mental wellness evidence to be able to engage the surgery. There's some crossover connections to fertility counseling and to the counseling they require for bariatric surgery. But it is where all of your money will go, because the therapy is many times not covered by insurance in those gray states. So you're paying this therapist an hour and $75 for 1 hour, $175 to listen to you convince, please, like, do you think I'm ready for a letter? Can I get a letter in 2 sessions? How many sessions will it take to get a letter? I have gone on to get into research collaboration with my gender surgeon, which is kind of like the plot twist that I didn't expect. He and I spent a lot of time together because I would be recovering and he would need to check on me 2 times a week. And we would have all of these conversations. And he discovered that I knew a few things about a few things. And he said, do you want to co-author with me on patient experiences and outcomes? So that's kind of the bittersweet happy ending as it goes on, that we've been able to speak together and build something as far as patient-practitioner relationships and exploring that from a research perspective that wouldn't have happened had I not been able to access it through the university. There's a doll made after me. This is Mattel's non-binary Barbie doll, and they call them the Creative World dolls. But it just has to do with when you choose to be out, it's like a capital O out, and people will seek you out. And if you don't mind being in the spotlight. I don't mind because I see how many people it helps for me to make myself vulnerable. But Mattel was like, okay, whose face can we use for the doll? And most people said, oh, heck no. And I was like, oh, that would be cool. I used to really love Barbie dolls. But this doll is called the Dark Blonde Hair, Blue Eyes doll. And they sell it on Target's website. I'm not trying to sell it. I get no money for it, but I enjoy the picture. We do so much fundraising in our own home. And I wish that I could put it on my resume in a way that people hiring could understand that we produce drag shows in the backyard with a jar of donations that everybody who comes to the show might put in $5 or $10 or $20, and by the end we've raised a few $1,000s for each of our evenings and paid the performers, and then we can donate it to other community organizations. We would do a fundraiser in our backyard like this once a month. Here's some pictures of, like we would sing in the backyard or invite storytellers to come and give oral histories or comedy about their experiences. And this is how we paid for each other's health care. We would especially pay for top surgery, which is the removal of the breasts and reconstruction of the chest, or I believe it's called thyroplasty, where they remove the Adam's apple and smooth it. Different surgeries that we could fundraise for in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. And the kinds of conversations that we could have sustained us when we left and went to work, and nobody understood what we were going through on the outside. Our communities are so tight-knit, and I wish that I could show other communities of learning or other communities of scholarship what it feels like when everyone is deeply invested in taking care of each other. We hunt for jobs for each other aggressively. We promote each other aggressively. We hold on to people that we don't like because we have the attitude that no one is disposable. And if they don't have us, they have no one. So it becomes like a chosen family. We have overlapped typical racial boundaries in Dallas because the trans community's resources are so scarce that we can't afford to be segregated. So there's the ballroom culture that we have in Dallas, and they tried to teach me to do the ballroom dances. I was terrible, but it means that sometimes I have a more regular cultural window into other groups than I might, because the trans community will welcome you, knowing nothing else about you but that you are trans. They will take care of you and make sure you have what you need to the best of our ability. We feed each other often, like this was a big crawfish boil that we had at the park. We have brunches at our house where 100 or 200 people will come and we'll discuss whatever medical need and present on it. We just recently provided CEUs for therapists who would come and sit silently at our events to observe how the community interacts within itself, and hopefully get better practitioners. We do shows together, and that's part of the stereotype of trans people, but the reality is that we do shows to survive also. If you have lost your job, but you can be part of a drag show or a burlesque show, then you can at least make $100 or $200 to pay the basic necessities of bills. However, many employers see that as in conflict with the ethical standards of education. So I was lucky that I was in the area of music making, but the other folks did have to take off their clothes. Not all of them, but quite a lot of them as part of the show. And if they had wanted to be educators or in our field, they could not then have been. We interact with drag kings as well as drag queens. This is Buck Wild and Ashley and me at some of the shows. We hunt for members of the community that don't have supports. So there's a fellow behind me in this picture who was brand new and he was just coming out to the show for the first time. And the way that we look for those that don't have community and pull them in, I wish we could do that in all of education. How often do we see somebody new and struggling, and if everybody who saw that person pulled them in and said, "You're my child now, I am your dad, even though the person's 2 years older than you. What do you need for your health care? What do you need for food? What kind of job do you have? There are even hookup apps that we get on specifically to ask other trans people, do you have resources? Do you know where the free clinics are in this town or in this state? I don't have the experience of that outside of LGBT and communities of color. We have reconciled with the Southwest community through an insistence that we love this place as much as you do. When I was a school board candidate, Ashley and I got to knock on so many different doors and speak to many groups, and they were so surprised that we actually had thoughts on education to share. And we knocked on doors with Confederate flags and bumper stickers that said, we shoot first. And there was that element of danger that we willingly engaged so that we could be part of these conversations to open schools and reopen schools. We reopened a neighborhood school as a public Montessori, and that became my specialized field. So now in Dallas we have 5 public Montessoris, and I have found the line of work where people are finally starting to see what I'm capable of doing, rather than this trans teacher is making everybody uncomfortable. We work with we're a very global community because we're so tight-knit. On any day, I have conversations with trans leaders in Hawaii or across the country. This is Logan and Layla Ireland, who were part of the trans military efforts. They led the conversation side that was the transgender folks in the military, because they're both trans and both distinguished in the military. And so we meet in private homes. I think that's another thing that many communities don't utilize. They look for formal spaces to meet, but our homes are our conference places. And when we throw our own conferences, we pitch tents in each other's backyards. The last conference that I came to in New Orleans, there was they called it Endless Gaycation, but it was organized mostly by trans sex workers. We use the term sex worker instead of prostitute because it's the language of profession instead of prosecution. And the Sex Workers Roundtable involved a lot of us who were engaged in public health. So I would be one of the public health people who knows a great deal about the surgeries and where to go and where to find, how to open clinics. I've helped open 2 to 3 gender clinics for accessing hormones, but that's not on my resume because it doesn't connect to a professional role. And I wonder if I include it, that it might make somebody have a second feeling about me. So I can't include those really impactful experiences of maybe helping organize a grassroots conference. And the amount of things that we can get done on no budget really makes me wonder how many things that we do without needing to. I mean, we might have enjoyed this conference as much if we were camping. Some people might not, but maybe there are possibilities. And really, do we need to spend the money that we do? I don't have an answer to that, but I know that going without spending the money, we still have been able to do quite a bit of organizing and work. We have a reach. We use social media especially to connect with people. When you meet somebody, when you find that outsider, you connect with them immediately on social media so that they can get all the messages of what's current, what's happening, what's going on. So when I go on Facebook and I say, we need to have a rally on Saturday, by Saturday there's 4,000 people standing outside of our resource center, and we have a microphone or a megaphone, and that's it. And we march, and we are able to make an impact that way because of listening so closely for our local leaders' voices and working so hard to elevate different voices. We call it passing the mic. I think other communities use that too, but if too many people are asking me to do things, I can say, you know what, no one has asked this person right here for anything. I'm gonna develop them as a leader right now. And I'm going to prepare them to do the talk instead of me so that we can distribute our leadership and not get exhausted, because the work is easily exhausting when you're going through so many medical things. I think that element of sharing leadership is magnified by the stress that we're under, but it could apply to all of us. And we give talks in hospitals. We elbow our way into things, because if we don't, we will be excluded. And maintaining relationships, I'm at an odd place in my life where I have good friends that are judges and state representatives, and good friends that are waiters and sex workers, and they call them rent boys, but you live with somebody else who likes you. And I can bring those people together and expose them to each other at these brunches, which I feel like is such a special and unique thing that we can do when we have friends from different places, to make sure that they know each other. And it's done with the knowledge that you might hurt somebody's feelings, because we do experience microaggressions. And I have experienced microaggressions here at this conference. But knowing that daily I'm in contact with the trans community, I can get through this because I can process, oh my gosh, I introduced myself to this woman. She was so kind, but she told me about someone she knew who was transgendering. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, that is not a verb that you do. But I didn't want to stop the flow of conversation, so you let it go. And it feels like one little mosquito bite. But then by the end of the day, you've gotten 200 mosquito bites, because somebody says, oh yeah, I know somebody transgender. There was a girl at our school, and she has decided that she is a man. And I'm wondering, why in the world are you using the pronoun she for this person? Oh, and she has started using the pronoun he. Then why are you still using that pronoun? And I nod and I acknowledge that these are strong potential allies, but I have to limit myself to exposure to it, because you just feel so beat down that these critical elements of yourself are going to be misunderstood and mischaracterized. There are pieces of trans community that don't call themselves trans. In Texas especially, there's travesti, or to say it in a more American accent, travesti, and it translates something like cross-dresser or transvestite. But if you ask someone from the travesti community, they will say, I'm not trans, because there's a slightly different cultural context. Or people that I would say, you're non-binary just like me, who perform in the Kiki balls and ballroom, they don't say, I'm trans. But they embody the role of a different gender visibly all of the time. And maybe even get hormones or some surgeries, but they say, no, I'm not trans, because the idea of trans is something different to them, maybe something more colonized than the travesti is connected to an indigenous experience of third gender, and in very complex ways. So when we talk about LGBTQ+, sometimes the plus means people whose needs intersect this community who are not part of the acronym and don't want to be part of the acronym. But the kinds of protections that we mutually need unite us, and will continue to do so. An example is the intersex community that does not identify as trans. Sometimes they do, but not by default. Or the asexual community that has overlapping maybe queer attractions or queer experiences, or non-binary gender, but they don't say they're gay or lesbian. It's very uncomfortable for my wife and I when something that's gay community is labeled gay and lesbian, or even gay, lesbian, bisexual, because we know trans people that are attracted to someone of the opposite sex, but they were reared in a different sex, and to look at them, they pass for a straight couple now. And to keep from outing themselves, they will outwardly share or even identify they are straight, but they need the same legal protections. And so they will say, we are a queer couple, or we are a trans straight couple. But there are so many possibilities that we can exclude when we just reduce things to gay and lesbian. Here's my work with LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. After different legislative things started happening, we got to a point where we could no longer operate in silos. And that's where that newly emergent racial cross-pollination of activist groups has really grown so much in the last 3 or 4 years. And here's how our family is some of the rest of the time when we're being silly. That's the rest of that picture. We did a lot of things down at the Senate where I had to leave work because Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick of Texas, this is what he looks like. He is absolutely obsessed with boogeyman trans women in restrooms, men dressed as women who are coming to hurt our children. But my wife and I were afraid when this happened, and we wondered if we were going to have to move to a different place. Are we going to have to apply for citizenship in Canada? Do we need to start studying a different language? What language do we need to learn? Where will we be safe? And I had to make conversation with some relatives, like, if we have to go in a hurry, which child should we prioritize taking, the transgender one, or wait until we can take both? And my children are half Jewish, and from the Jewish family, they gave us the wisdom of, you will separate and come back together later. So we are ready to split up our families. This intersects with the needs of undocumented trans families that we're in contact with. Using my visibility as an educator, my allies on the school board invited me to speak about the bathroom bills, especially as a trans man. A lot of these boogeyman tropes didn't apply to me because they were imagining men dressed as women going into ladies' restrooms. And from their perspective, I was a woman dressed as a man trying to get into men's restrooms, which didn't scare anybody. And I felt approachable and friendly. And I thought that with who I am, it would be very easy to see me as a non-threatening person. And we went down to the Capitol. This is a group of trans men in Dallas who organize. This is on my left there is Mr. Black Trans. He won the title. We planned with Jess Herbst, the mayor of New Hope, Texas, the first out transgender politician of any level in Texas. She was voted out of office after she came out, but she helped us organize and spoke. We took our children down, and we could see the weight of it was taking a toll on them to hear these messages. When you sit and wait for your turn to speak, you have to hear the vitriol spoken against you. And we wish that we could protect them from it. But they said that my story didn't really matter because the more important thing was keeping our children safe. And I told them that my top goal is keeping children safe. I do that every day. But I think that's when the worst of my anxiety, depression started to take over, when I felt like no matter what I do in this field, the doors just keep getting slammed in my face. I can't be a candidate for school board. I'm a trans candidate, and I'm a controversy, and I'm the transgender debate. I went into an intensive outpatient therapy program to unlearn those fears, or to process through them, or to get to a place. I think when I was running for office, it was wonderful to meet all the folks in the community, and 33% of Grand Prairie, which is the 6th most conservative precincts in the state of Texas, voted for me. Even if they didn't politically align with me, they knew that I could do a good job. And that was my glimmer of hope. And it led to a reconciliation with my father. There's not a ton of time to go through a lot of the other themes I would love to explore, but I'll just go through some of these quickly to give you the visual. My daughter started transitioning, and I didn't even see it at first. I thought, we're just letting her explore gender expression without stereotypes or limitations. But eventually, at a point, she said, "Dad, I'm not breaking stereotypes. I'm communicating that I am a girl in the symbols that you should understand." And I had to take pause because the trans children still teach us so much. They know things that even those of us who would call ourselves educated in trans things. She stops me, and I said, do you like girls or boys for your crushes? And she said, no, you have the crush first, and then I can tell you their gender. But we just go on with family life, and she is now an 11-year-old trans girl, and she has chosen to be out in some places and stealth in other places. She has recently fought her own battle to have her gender marker corrected on the school's data system, so that when we helped make that mural together, so that when the school's substitute teacher comes in and reads the roll, they're saying, well, you're not Sydney. Sydney's a boy here, and argue with her about her gender, or not allow her to go to get her spine checked when all the girls are getting tested for scoliosis. We wish so much that when people make decisions about dress codes or how to write the church play, that they could include stories of people like us. We found a church that is a gay church. For 50 years, Dallas loves church, so we're gonna do our own version of it if we get kicked out of our churches. And that's the culture of Dallas. If you don't want me, I'm gonna make my own. So this is our gay church, and our 5,000 members, they did a celebration blessing me before my gender surgeries. And they allowed me to read in the church and be in the church. And I had also been crushed by the weight of not being allowed to be part of my prior community of faith. And these are my pastors. They're 2 gay men and 1 lesbian woman. But I have so much hope that we will see more transgender representation in education without it being a controversy. I wish so much that we could just do the work that we're called to do. And usually after sharing some of these things, people ask me, what can I do to help? And I wanted to frame any of those kind of answers with, if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I have found myself to be a better ally of other groups at the margins because of my experiences. And I have had deeper relationships than ever could have been possible otherwise. There's a parable from Mexico that we hear in Texas frequently. They tried to bury us, but we are the seeds. There is a deep sense of optimism that is a current in trans community, because if it were not, in the face of hundreds of murders each year just on the basis of our genders, and the rates of unemployment and firings and discrimination and healthcare inaccess, we would just be too sad. So we encourage each other constantly that no matter how hard they try to push us down, we will keep growing. And where they shut doors, we will climb out windows. And I would hope to share that sense of tenacity or grit or whatever you want to call it with all of my colleagues in education. I am a coach of teachers as a Montessori specialist, and I hear so many statements of feeling defeated or things are too difficult. And the trans habit is to say, and we keep going anyway. So to close, I loved this tweet from Ava DuVernay: become your ancestors' wildest dream. The kind of surgeries that I've had, the ability that I've had to be open, the ability that I've had even to be rejected, to survive as myself, has been more than so many of the ancestors of the trans community could have achieved in our place and time. And being able to speak to all of you and all of the institutions that you will touch are a great gift. I'm incredibly thankful for the way that Southern Methodist University passed the mic to me to allow me to speak with you today. Thank you very much. If you'd like to, we could do some questions. I think we have. So there are some of those equity audits are a good start that are already made. There are a lot of small things that will exclude trans populations from the very beginning, from even applying to the organization. For example, holding the educational credential as the highest prerequisite for work, or not allowing people who have felony convictions to apply in your organization, or people who have sex work in their background, or have done sex work over cams in the past, and you might be able to find it online. A lot of us cannot even consider doing work in education, even if it were our passion, because of the barriers that exist in those moral turpitude sections of the contracts. I feel like there's room for exception clauses being made. I also see the background check systems will automatically flag someone to fail a background check if it finds another name that's very different from your first and last name, and it's seen as like a criminal alias. So, and also a lot of those employment application systems that are so automated look at your credit score. And if we have maxed out our credit cards on surgeries and trips to Thailand to try to get discount chop shop surgeries, our credit is gonna stink. We're gonna fail the background check, and maybe we had to drop out of that bachelor's program because of the pressures in our life. But this person still has developed maybe a powerful ability to organize folks. Maybe they have experience with large organizations, but they're all grassroots, and maybe they're not affiliated with any institution. I think the more that we let go of the stigmas associated with queer community, then we can see the kinds of capacities folks already have. I would also hope that every organization gives an LGBT language glossary 101 sort of training, because if you want to welcome somebody who is transitioning in the workplace and you use violent language, that person's not going to feel like they're in a place that's ready to welcome them. When I started transitioning as a teacher, I called the Human Resources Department and said, okay, what's the procedure? And fortunately, I was in one of 3 school districts in Texas out of 1,200 that would allow me to work as out, but they didn't have a plan for what that would look like. So make sure you have a plan in place, that there is a liaison person ready to talk to you about, okay, here's who you go to have your email handle changed so your old name doesn't show. And here's a form letter that we have for announcing your correct pronoun to everyone. However, if you want to write it differently or share more or less, that's totally up to you. We can contact your prior professional contacts to update them if that would be awkward for you. And we can also provide a letter of explanation if references are checked somewhere and the name is totally different, so you don't have to lose all your references, a lot of professional things like that. And leniency in the dress code helps so much. There are some workplaces where you have to wear a suit coat, and those are one of the most expensive elements to have custom made. Or you have to wear dress shoes, and trans women really struggle to find shoes in the right size. The clothing requirements are hard for us. So that's just a start.
Thank you all again for being here. We really appreciate it. We know that you could be anywhere else, right, in another session. And I know that Johnny's thankful for your presence. And I'm also very thankful for all of you being here. Have a great afternoon.
If any of you would like to talk further, I'll be available in the networking area.